What if the courtroom wasn't a place for truth, but a stage for power games played behind closed doors? What if every gavel strike wasn't justice served, but a warning disguised as law? She walked in with evidence. They walked in with influence. And somewhere in between, the truth was gasping for air. The walls reeked of secrets no one dared to speak. The judge's eyes said more than his rulings. And the man on trial, he smiled like he'd already won. But something's about to crack. And when it does, who will fall with it? Stay close. Justice is about to bleed. The courtroom was too quiet. Not the respectful kind of silence that honored justice, but the stifling, watchful kind, like a predator holding its breath before the pounce. Ivy Quinn stepped inside, heels sharp against marble, spine straight as steel. Her charcoal gray suit hugged her frame with precision, but her armor wasn't fabric, it was resolve. At 35, she had already earned a reputation that sent shivers through corrupt corridors. The press called her the Iron Flame. Her enemies called her worse. She wore both like badges. Today, all eyes turned as she entered. At the far end of the room sat Vincent Langley, his tailored suit pristine, his smile razor thin. He exuded the kind of confidence born from knowing the rules were written in his favor, and bent by his wealth. Ivy didn't flinch. She'd faced men like him before. But today wasn't just another trial. Her eyes shifted toward the bench. There sat Judge Gregory Alden, hands folded, gaze cool. His face was unreadable, but his reputation wasn't. Alden was the wild card of the judiciary, praised for his intellect, whispered about for his connections. Rumors tied him to the very elites Ivy had spent her career exposing. Nothing proven. Nothing obvious. But Ivy had learned long ago, power always leaves a scent. As their eyes met, something in Alden's look made her gut tighten. He knows something. Or worse, he thinks he controls something. She made her way to the prosecution table, laying down her case files with careful precision. Behind her, murmurs buzzed from the gallery, journalists, politicians, citizens hungry for blood or justice, depending on the headline. A clerk called the room to order. The bailiff shut the heavy doors with a dull thud that echoed like a warning. Judge Alden's voice broke the silence. "Let us begin." It was calm. Too calm. And in that calm, Ivy could feel it, the invisible weight pressing against her chest. She wasn't just about to prosecute one of the city's wealthiest men. She was about to challenge something far darker. The system itself was watching. And it was ready to strike back. Ivy rose from her seat, her voice steady. "Your Honor, the prosecution is prepared to present evidence establishing a direct financial trail between public redevelopment funds and a series of shell companies tied to Mr. Langley." Before she could take a step toward the evidence screen, Judge Alden lifted a hand. "Ms. Quinn, let's not waste the court's time with conspiracy theories dressed up as financial jargon." A quiet ripple of disbelief moved through the courtroom. Ivy blinked. Did he just call the evidence a waste of time, before even seeing it? "With all due respect, Your Honor, these aren't theories. These are audited documents from the State Treasury and the Department of Urban Development." Alden smirked. "So you say. Proceed, but keep it brief. The court has better things to do than sift through spreadsheets." Langley's lead attorney let out a soft chuckle. Ivy caught it. So did the jury. She turned toward them, and that's when she saw it. Their expressions weren't surprised. They were bored. Familiar. They've seen this before. The defense sat smug, as if they'd already read the script. Ivy wasn't just fighting Langley. She was performing in a rigged play, one where the judge directed the ending before the curtain even rose. But she didn't flinch. She called up the first set of documents. Exhibit A, she said, her voice now firmer, slicing through the tension like glass. A $14 million transfer, routed through a construction firm, owned on paper by a Mr. Elias Crane. Crane, as you'll see in the attached affidavit, is a former accountant for Langley Global, and has no record of any construction license. Judge Alden leaned back. Objectionable foundation. Overruled. He turned to her. Next. Ivy's jaw clenched. Still, she pressed forward. By the time she reached the fourth document, the murmurs had returned, this time from the gallery. She could feel the tide shifting. Some members of the jury leaned in. Then came the moment she had planned for, prepared for, feared. Ivy slid a folder from the bottom of her briefcase. Your Honor, she said, unfolding a contract with a steady hand, this is a development agreement signed between the city and a holding firm, Barrow Knox. This firm received $52.7 million in city funds. The signature on this contract belongs to Vincent Langley. She paused, then added, and yours, Judge Alden. The room froze. A second of silence fell, too long, too sharp. The judge's face didn't twitch, but the way he slowly blinked spoke volumes. That document, he said, almost casually, is inadmissible. On what grounds? Ivy snapped, her voice now laced with incredulity. Chain of custody. Or lack thereof. That's not a valid. Miss Quinn, he barked, louder now, eyes narrowing. Sit down. But Ivy didn't move. The gallery stirred. Reporters shifted. Even Langley's attorneys seemed momentarily unsure whether to gloat or panic. Someone in the jury whispered, did he just shut her down for proving he signed it? A murmur grew. Ivy stood her ground. Let the record show, she said clearly, that the presiding judge has denied the inclusion of a contract bearing his own signature, without substantive reason. Judge Alden pounded the gavel once. The court will strike that from the record. But the tension? It was already in the air. Thick. Suspicious. And Ivy could see it now, just for a flash, on Alden's face. Fear. The night before had been a warning. Ivy had returned to her office late, the overhead lights flickering like nervous eyes. The door was ajar. Papers scattered. File drawers yanked open. Her computer monitor still glowing. The air smelled of latex gloves and fear. Someone had been looking for something. And they knew exactly where to find it. She moved calmly, almost coldly, to the hidden panel beneath her bookshelf. Inside, untouched, was a small black flash drive, labeled not with a case number, but with a single word, insurance. Now, in court, that word was about to mean something. Back in the courtroom, Ivy adjusted the microphone. Your Honor, she began, voice slow, deliberate, before we proceed, I have new material evidence to submit. Alden squinted. New? Ms. Quinn, we're in the middle of testimony. I'm inclined to reject. This pertains to a break-in at my office last night, she cut in. And to the motive behind it. A hush fell. Ivy pulled the flash drive from her pocket, raised it for the room to see. This copy was not stored in my office. It was hidden off-site. It contains a scanned version of the original contract, identical to the one you just deemed inadmissible. Alden's face paled, just a flicker. Langley, for the first time, leaned forward. No more smirking. Ivy continued, her tone crisp. And more importantly, it contains something else. She turned to the technician. Play the audio file titled July 8, 9:17 p.m. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then a voice came through, grainy, but unmistakable. I don't care how she got the document. You'll suppress it. Destroy the backups. Make sure she never sees daylight with this case. There was a long pause. Then the voice again. If she gets close, shut her down. Use the court. Use me if you have to. A gasp broke out. Several people rose from their seats. Journalists scrambled, notebooks flying open, recorders snapping on. A cameraman bumped into a chair trying to zoom. Judge Alden didn't move. Not a blink. Not a breath. But his hand, his left hand, tightened around the armrest until his knuckles blanched white. Langley's complexion went chalk gray. His lawyer whispered something frantic, but Langley didn't answer. He was staring at Ivy like he'd just seen a ghost. She stepped forward, voice like ice. The voice on that recording belongs to Judge Gregory Alden. Confirmed by an independent forensic analyst. The statement you just heard occurred during a phone call traced to his chambers the night after I filed the subpoena against Mr. Langley. Silence. The kind that vibrates. Then chaos. Motion for removal of the judge. Someone shouted. What the hell is this? Get the cameras rolling, get this live. The clerk's eyes darted between screens. Bailiffs started moving. A reporter tripped over her own feet, whispering into a mic. Ivy remained still. Her gaze locked with Alden's. For the first time since this trial began, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked exposed. This court will disregard the audio. Judge Alden's voice rang out, loud and clipped, the final note of a man losing grip on control. That file was obtained through illegal surveillance. I will have it stricken from the record. The jury is instructed to ignore what they just heard. But no one in the courtroom was listening. They weren't even breathing. Langley's legal team exchanged panicked glances, one of them mouthing silently, "We're screwed." Langley himself sat statue still, his fingers clenched so tight around the armrest that his knuckles looked ready to crack bone. Then came the sound. Not from Ivy. Not from the defense. But from the heavy double doors of the courtroom, thrown open with a thunderous bang. 3 armed officers entered, flanking a woman in a midnight blue uniform. Captain Elena March. Her presence alone cut the room into two, those who feared the law, and those who thought they controlled it. Alden's eyes flicked toward her, a flicker of disbelief surfacing in the mask. She stepped forward, voice unwavering, formal, lethal. "Gregory Thomas Alden," she said, holding up a signed warrant, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to defraud the state, and abuse of power under the Federal Integrity Statute." Gasps erupted. From the jury box, a woman dropped her notepad. In the gallery, a reporter's pen snapped mid-sentence. Cameras swiveled and clicked like a storm of metal wasps. Alden didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't deny. He rose slowly, straightened his robe with eerie calm, then turned to face Ivy. The mask of the judge was gone. In its place, the face of something colder. More deliberate. "You think this is the end?" he said quietly. "You think putting me in chains will fix the rot?" Captain March approached, cuffs in hand. But before she could reach him, Alden leaned down. His face close to Ivy's. A breath apart. His voice dropped to a whisper so low it felt like poison sliding behind her ear. "You think I'm the top of the chain? Darling. You've only scraped the surface." Then he smiled. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't even proud. It was relieved. Like a man who'd handed off a secret he no longer wanted to carry. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. The gavel fell to the floor with a dull wooden thunk. And with that, The titan of the bench was led through the crowd, silent now, parted like a sea, as the press surged to life in his wake. Langley's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. He wasn't supposed to, he whispered, more to himself than anyone. The courtroom was a battlefield. Not from chaos, but from silence. The kind that lingers after a bomb has gone off. After a crown has been torn down. Ivy stood motionless, chest rising and falling, her mind racing faster than her breath could catch up. Alden's words, "You've only scraped the surface," echoed louder than the gavel. Langley was still seated, but he was unraveling. His tie was loosened, his jacket half off his shoulder, his skin pale as wax. When their eyes met, he didn't smirk. He pleaded. "We both know he wasn't acting alone," he said, his voice shaking. "They gave him orders. Just like they gave me." Ivy didn't answer. "I want to talk." His tone dropped. "I can give you names. Timelines. Donations. Offshore accounts. But I need protection." She stared at him, not as a prosecutor, but as a woman standing at the edge of a chasm, staring into what could be the true face of power. Annette stared back. She leaned in, her voice low but steel-edged. "Give me everything. And you might live to see a courtroom again." He nodded quickly. Too quickly. Reporters pushed forward. Questions flew like bullets. "Ms. Quinn, what does this mean for the trial? Is Langley making a deal? How deep does this go?" She raised one hand. The room quieted. She spoke into the noise like a blade through fog. "No one is above the law. Not Langley. Not Alden. And certainly not the puppeteers still hiding in the shadows." As she turned to leave, her phone vibrated. One new message. "Unknown number, you should have stopped at Alden. You're in over your head now, Ms. Quinn." She stared at the screen. Then slid the phone into her pocket, her jaw tightening. Good. Because the war was no longer in the courtroom. It was just beginning.